Hello, my name is Sarah Ann Aarup. I'm a reporter with Politico. And welcome to this session of Politico Live's Sustainable Future Summit, where I'm joined by two fantastic guests to discuss EU's supply chains and the EU's future law on these sustainable supply chains. Now, Brussels wants to make sure that in the near future, everything that people buy within the bloc has not contributed to any environmental damage and also has not contributed to any human rights abuses around the world. And these upcoming rules are, of course, very politically divisive and explosive, since they have the potential to reshape how supply chains are managed and how companies source all of their goods. So before we begin, just a quick reminder, please make sure to send your questions in via the Swapcard app, and I'll make sure to read them out to our speakers. And also, please do tweet about this event using the hashtag Politico Sustainability. Now, it is my great pleasure to welcome our two speakers today. We have Eva Bennis, who is the Sustainable Supply Chains Director for Volvo Group. Welcome. And we also have Axel Voss, who is a member of the European Parliament from Germany with the European People's Party, and who was also the shadow rapporteur on corporate sustainable governance. Welcome.
Hi.
Now, so I'd just like to kick off this discussion by looking at some of the freshest news that's come out of yesterday. And the Commission's in-house auditors have actually rejected sustainable corporate governance a second time. And this means that now the law is only going to come out perhaps in February or March. I just wanted to get your reactions to this news. Perhaps first, Axel Voss, please.
So at first, thanks a lot for the invitation and this possibility. And regarding your question, so we do not have exactly information what's going on, and so probably we are informed by Politico on that way that this is not in a way brought forward what we have been expected. So of course we are a little bit disappointed because it's the second time that we are getting a kind of a delay here, but if they are doing this properly, then we should be quite happy at the end. So from what we are here, is also the issues with the regulatory scrutiny board are relating to climate, and they seem fixable. And we hope the climate standards are clearly defined and practical for undertakings, not like in the CSRD. And so that we are hoping to have the Commission proposal soon, so we can finish the package also till the end of our term here. So that's why we are expecting these now more or less for March 2022. So.
Right, yes. And so you say that these issues seem fixable, but I was just wondering, from a business perspective, Eva, how are you taking this news? What does this mean for you practically? Does it mean more uncertainty, or on the contrary, are you perhaps also relieved that the sustainable corporate governance will be taking a bit more time to be thought out?
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you as well for inviting me to this little debate here. And yes, it's a little bit of both, I would have to say. Of course, I mean, I'm a bit disappointed because we have been waiting for this now for a very long time, and we are anticipating, and we want, of course, from the Volvo Group, we are doing a lot of these things already voluntarily, so this is not new for us. We've been practicing due diligence in our supply chain for many years. But of course, we really would like to know whether we are on the right path or whether we need to re-steer or redirect any of our processes and the way we are working to really fit into the legal framework. And now we see that Germany is already up and running with their due diligence requirements. Of course, we really would like to have a European unification on this one so that we are not running away on local national regulations. And that is happening. I mean, we see more countries wanting to prepare for it. So I think the European Union really has a role here to unify us and make a unified regulation. And I think for that, it should come rather sooner than later.
All right, and so just moving on to the practical aspect again, this is why it's so interesting to speak to companies about this. From a business perspective, could you please give us a concrete example of how you're using due diligence for a specific product, perhaps using it to go towards one supplier rather than another? If you could just give us an example to give us an image.
Yes, sure. I mean, due diligence practices is really about, it's identifying, it's about preventing, it's about mitigating and accounting for. I mean, that's how you summarize due diligence practices. And this is, of course, it's not an easy task. It's something that requires a lot of work and a lot of cooperations with your supply partners. The automotive industry, where I am from, we have many tiers from the raw material extraction to when the components end up on our assembly sites. That can be 10, 15, layers in between. So of course, creating due diligence, transparency, cooperation is not an easy task. But taking, for example, some concrete examples is, for example, now on steel is a very, heavy raw material, which we are very heavily dependent on in our industry. And we are working together, for example, now in Sweden with SSAB, a Swedish steel mill producer, about creating fossil-free steel. So these partnerships is really, a concrete example how we can mitigate for negative environmental impacts and working with the CO2 impact in our supply chain. So really getting closer to your supply partners and working on a win-win situation, because when we all win, we can all work towards the same goal. So that is one concrete example where we see where due diligence is really coming into its life. But then, of course, it's a little bit also different compared to the type of materials that you would buy.
Right, and so you say that on steel, for instance, you go towards certain suppliers rather than others. Can you give any concrete examples of issues where you've decided to switch over, or things so we can picture this a bit?
Well, we have in our supplier selection, we have a very thorough supplier selection process where all our suppliers are assessed on various aspects, not just on sustainability, but also on quality, on features and delivery and on cost, of course, all kinds of aspects. But sustainability is one big part of it in these assessments. So when we go through our supplier screening process and onboarding new suppliers, we perform, for example, sustainability audits. We do on-site audits, and without naming or shaming anyone, we have had situations where suppliers then have not passed through this type of assessments, and where we decided to pursue other suppliers in this type of onboarding process. We have also seen where we have suppliers who have not been able to commit to our standards that we all are very accessible through our supplier code of conducts, for example, where we are very clear on our requirements towards our supply chain, and where we have then not met and accept of these types of standards, we have very early on then said, well, thank you, you will not be considered for business in our company. So because it's always much easier, of course, to choose the right supply partner from the beginning, rather than to try to change and account for things that are happening down the road, because then it is very much more difficult to change.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for giving us that example. And turning to you, Axel, it seems like the Commission now is trying to, or is not interested in including small companies in due diligence rules. Can you tell us a bit more about this, and how do you see this choice?
So, of course, it's always a big question how the scope should look like. And here we should more concentrate probably and to the, we should target more those companies that have the power and the leverage in the first step. Probably we can't come up already with a kind of overall approach, but we should take the first step in the right direction. And therefore, we should think about which one we include and which not. And we cannot probably ask every single company operating in the EU to identify every single supplier and then let them alone with every single possible risk. So that's why we have to approach these very carefully. And of course, regarding this question, we have found a solution here so far in the Parliament where we might be satisfied with, but this can't be the solution in a legislative act at the end. So that's why we have to think about how to approach these, but then it might be a little bit different than the approach in the member states already, because we have a different situation on the European level and we cannot compare probably what we are doing here with the situation in the member state. And as Eva already said, we are trying to split our common market already in this question. So if Germany has one law, France has already a law in place, let's say Denmark and Netherlands have some special aspects. We are coming now from the European level with the deforestation report and so on, and they're starting a lot. And I think there's really a need to harmonize these and to have a kind of a real good single market at the end with all problems we might face now, but I hope there is a kind of a thinking on a way where we are saying that we shouldn't send out fragmentation signals, we should more send out harmonization signals, and actually therefore, of course, we have to be careful.
And on that point of harmonization or fragmentation, Eva, how do you see the current EU market right now? I guess that you have to comply both with the German law and the French law, soon perhaps a Dutch law. How do you see that interacting with the future EU due diligence law?
Yes, as I said, I think it is crucial that we are unifying the requirements because we have a very global supply chain. I think most of the big, larger multinational companies, they have, of course, very, international supply chains, and our supplies come from all corners of the world. And it is going to be so difficult if we can't rely on one standard framework. So it is, of course, crucial that we kind of align that one. And although I do understand that some local and national legislators are now taking the steps to kind of progress it because it's going a bit slow in the European Union, I think it's crucial. But we are working a lot together in the automotive industry in Europe already. We have Drive Sustainability, for example, which is the cooperation between automotive OEMs to work together on supply chain sustainability. And of course, we're trying to find the minimum denominators now so that we have one way of working that fits all, basically. And right now it seems to be working, but depending now on the future and if it's going to be spreading out more, it's going to be more complicated, of course. But we're trying to look at what is the right thing to do, and that usually works then very well with at least how it looks right now in the legislation.
Mm-hmm. And so what kind of a law would you prefer? Are you more in favor of a French-style law, a German-style law? What do you think about the whole question of tiers? Please, Eva.
Oh, that's a good question. What do I prefer? The German one is pretty clear in terms of that it targets tier one suppliers primarily. And then, of course, below tier ones, it is only targeted if you have a specific impact, or if I remember it correctly. So I think we have an obligation to address the whole supply chain, of course. But we would like any legislation to be more impact oriented rather than process oriented, because even sometimes if you have the most perfect process, what is the impact you're trying to do? And to try to achieve one impact, there could be various ways and various types of processes to reach it. And I think at the end, looking at what are we trying to achieve here rather than how, is really how we would like to prefer it from our business perspective, because we want to do the right thing but let us choose a bit on exactly how we achieve it.
So if we look at models, you're more in favor of a German-style law? Did I get that correctly?
I guess. Not knowing the exact details on all the different legislations, I guess, yes, that would be the answer.
Mm-hmm. And actually, just speaking about Germany, with the recent elections and with the new coalition, I think this will perhaps rejig a bit the cards on due diligence here in the EU. Axel, could you perhaps just give us a bit of a flavor of what's to come in your point of view?
So the new government coalition treaty says they will not change the law, but is hoping for common EU legislation that goes further. So this is something, the only text what we can find right now, and the position of the new or the upcoming government coalition. So of course, if we are going further, what does this mean? We have to think about really, because the German law is both in terms of civil liability and also tracking of supply chain, tier one and large undertakings more. And this is different from how we are seeing this so far, because we are preferring the so-called risk-based approach. And therefore, we are differentiating between liability and tracking. So we will base the risk on sector and size and leverage and so on. And this, I do not know if the German new government will see this as a kind of of this idea of going further, but it's different on our level. And this is what we have to have in mind. And also, of course, coming always with the idea not to be over bureaucratic to our companies. That's why I think also a pragmatical approach would be the best idea in every sense. So that's why we are preferring this one, but let's wait what the Commission is proposing probably in March.
And precisely on this question of how to design the law to make it work for companies, Eva, I was wondering if you could give us a concrete example again of what is it like for a large company to have a lot of smaller suppliers. How can you concretely police those to make sure that they don't have any abuses in their supply chains? And have you ever acted as a whistleblower to point out some problems lower down in the supply chains?
Yes, I mean, talking about small and medium-sized suppliers, I don't have the exact figures in front of me here, but we know that, of course, they represent a large portion of the supply partners that we have in our supply chains. And although they maybe have a small, in terms of the financial thresholds and so forth, and supply chain, they are maybe less represented, of course. But we kind of have the approach that we think that everyone needs to be on board. If we give signals that the small and medium-sized suppliers are not affected and don't have to pursue sustainability practices, it also sends the wrong signals. What we rather would like to see is that everyone needs to be on board. However, these types of supply partners and companies, of course, need to have help. They need to get access to information, to toolboxes, etc. That, of course, will help them to on board on this journey. And we are not just looking at, of course, these types of in Europe. I mean, if you look at further down our supply chain, of course, these are situated outside of Europe. And of course, they also need practical guidance on how can they do this? How can they accelerate, and how can they be suitable to fit into the European standards of a sustainable supply chain? So I think it's...
Sorry. What do you think that the Commission should do then to give this practical guidance?
I mean, have toolboxes and guidances to explain exactly what is to give best practice examples, standards. I know already that we are there are various tools in the development like Catena X and so forth, which is going to help on the transparency and the data accessibility, and that for example, on the environmental impacts to be measured going forward, that companies need to know and get help on how do I actually start to measure my climate impact, for example. How do I, what kind of numbers do I need to provide, and how do I put it into the system, so to say. So guidance and standards and platforms available so that not only we, the larger multinational companies can use, but also the small ones. And so that everyone understands that if you're not entering into this sustainability path, so to say, you will not be considered as potential business partners in the future. So I think that's very crucial. But it goes all the way. It's not just in Europe. It needs to go all the way. We need to work together with other countries where the development might not have been come so far as in Europe, where we are extracting the raw materials, or where we are having the refinement and the processing of raw materials, so that we can work together on government levels to actually achieve these types of standards. I think that's also something we would like to see.
And precisely, if you see that a company isn't complying, what is your role as the policer in this case? Do you have an obligation to say something to someone? How does that work concretely?
That's a good question. I mean, it's of course we always have. We are already cooperating a lot in, as I said, in the automotive industry. But we also have. I'm not really a favor of that. We as a company need to act as whistleblowers in terms of non-sustainable companies. There are competition law, aspects to take into account. If we would go out and say that company XX is not fulfilling our standards, that would probably not be considered very correct in other aspects. So I think there are some really important aspects to be considered going forward. Of course, we can be more open about who we choose. Of course, it's business, secrets and everything that needs to also be considered. But being more open and I think transparency overall in the future needs to increase, so that our customers want to know, of course, who have been involved in producing the products that we deliver, and that we also open with it. So transparency needs to increase going forward. But then, of course, putting the spotlight on the good ones rather than maybe putting the spotlights on the bad ones.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And turning to Axel, quickly, I was wondering, what are some of the next steps now until March? What will you be looking at? What will you be doing on sustainable corporate governance?
So at first, as it always is in the European Parliament, we have to clarify in which committee is which committee is competent for this. Of course, we think it has to be the Juri committee, and there so far I would say there's no argument also in saying it shouldn't go to the Juri committee. So that's why then we will take this approach by the Commission and discussing these also politically between these 7 political groups. And because we have had already a very broad approach so far, we can we have already a kind of a starting point and an understanding of these. And therefore now probably we have to fine-tune some elements here that we will come to a pragmatical approach for the companies and not overburdening the companies with a lot of issues what might also come up. But therefore then we will discuss, and we hope probably we might finish these in half a year, or let's say 7 or 8 months with the summer break. And then hopefully we can come to the trilogue and come to an end probably in 1 year's time, or let's say in the spring 23.
And so if the file does land in jury, are you interested in being closely involved in the file, perhaps as shadow?
Yes, so far we have done the work so far, and we created between the shadow rapporteurs also a very good atmosphere. And the lead by Lara Wolters was in such good hands that I hope we can continue with this group and with this leadership by Lara. And then I might be also involved if this is coming to Yuri, and I would like also to participate here.
Great. And we actually have a question from the floor on the Swap Card app. And so someone's asking, what's the incentive for a company to be a whistleblower in the context of this future law? Perhaps, does one of you want to take this question? Would perhaps Eva, would you like to take this question of the incentive of being a whistleblower?
Yes, that's a good question. What would be the incentive for us to be a whistleblower? I'm not sure actually what the incentives from a company perspective would be. I mean, we of course want to choose the right supply partners and business partners overall. We want to work with the good ones. And that is a process and screening process we're already performing and will be even better in the future, and choosing the right partners from the very beginning, because it's very difficult to actually change someone once the business is up and running. And if we would go out and whistleblow on the bad ones, I don't think I don't personally think it's the role of the companies to do that. We are choosing our partners, and we want to, of course, be transparent with that to everyone buying our products. But I'm having difficulty to see what the business for us, impacts of us would be to being a whistleblower. And maybe the role of others then more.
Mm-hmm. And just one wrap-up question, what will you be looking out for over the next few months in terms of what you want to see in the future law? What will you be focusing on, Axel?
So we have to focus about the scope, who should be in and out, and always having in mind that the question of fundamental rights and sustainability and so on is in the first row always a question of for our member states, but now we are transferring this also to the company level, and therefore we have to find a scope what is practical and for the companies to fulfill. And this is so that we are not over asking and over demanding and threatening them with some legal risk in place. And one question also might be the liability question, the size of the company, how we can create a kind of a cascade system of the supply chains. And I think these are the most important questions. Also, if we're coming to the risk-based approach on size of companies or what sectors are, and perhaps the geographic locations, and so on. These are, I would say, the main topics what we have to discuss.
Great. And you, Eva, very quickly, what will you be looking out for precisely?
I think what we already hear here, scope is going to be really in a big one. And we already have the battery regulation drafted, so which also contains supply chain due diligence requirements. I think we already have a little bit of a flavor of what we might be expecting, and we see the discussions going around the battery regulation, which is of course only one part of our supply chains, but a very big one. So also in the terms of the the risk assessment is like who is allowed to set the rules and the standards for the risk assessments. Will it be up to us, the companies to do that, or will it be open up for more stakeholder, involvement? That stakeholders, any types of stakeholder, it could be communities or impacted NGOs or whatever, that could go in and give input to what is a risk and what is not a risk. So that's going to be very interesting to see where we are landing on that definition.
Great. Thank you to both of our speakers for having made the time. This proposal is really a slow burn, so I think that we'll have a lot to talk about in the months and years ahead. And so now for people in the room, please enjoy your networking lunch until 2:15, at which point there'll be an interview with Lana Popovic, who's Europe Operations President for the Coca-Cola Company. Stay tuned. Thank you.